Um, from a seller's perspective, the negotiations you have really start, as soon as you have that conversation. A seller will come to you and look to you for an opinion on value. What's it going to take? How much am I going to get? What can I expect a timeline to be? When you're entering into that listing agreement with the seller, you're starting the first part of multiple negotiation processes. So you're negotiating to establish that relationship with the seller, and then eventually you're going to ultimately negotiate a contract to purchase and sale as far as completing that listing and getting that property sold. Does anybody have any particular instances where they've had a negotiating situation with their seller right up front? Where I encourage everybody to share.
I haven't dealt with many sellers because a lot of us newbies get all the impossible buyers and trailers and stuff. But I think when it comes to sellers' expectations and stuff like that, it's important to have like a plan B, especially when you're dealing with sellers who obviously think that their place is worth a lot more than the market can bear. Then I think it's important to always have an upfront conversation with them about a plan B, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks down the road when nobody's doing anything with their listing, nobody's looking and nobody's offering, to kind of bring them down to reality. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Setting expectations at the very beginning is super important. And, especially with sellers and in particular markets that are a little bit more challenging for sellers, be very clear in your communication, and don't be shy. And don't hesitate about, expressing what your thought is based on the information that you have and the information that you provided. And, from that point there, you almost have the ability to initiate sort of a negotiation, what that contract looks like. The typical, contract with a 6 and 3 or a 7 and 3 or a 7 and 4 listing is pretty standard. But ultimately, you guys have the ability to negotiate whatever commission that a seller would be willing to pay you. You don't have to use whatever it is. There's no standard. There's no structure. It's whatever you feel is reasonable for the value that you're providing. There's that 6 and 3 sort of typical commission of what you would expect. So that's really the foundation of because they already know. So that's the foundation of what they're expecting from you. They want to see value for the $15,000 or $20,000 that contract is going to be providing them. So if you're over and above, and when you get to that point, feel free to negotiate that. Like, if you guys can get a higher earning or earn yourselves more money, there's all the power in the world to you. The key there is, when you're having that conversation and you're ultimately negotiating with the seller on that, is you need to be able to provide the value. You have to be confident in your position. You have to be confident in your words. You have to be confident in your presentation. And providing value, the minute you start providing value, it's really the minute that the client starts realizing that value, is when they start to get comfortable and they start to trust you, and they start to have a little bit of faith and a little bit of confidence in your ability. So it's really sort of the foundation of how that entire relationship is going to go.
Hey, Darren.
Yeah.
In that situation where you're having that, you're having that conversation up front with your client, trying to set expectations, saying basically, okay, sure, we'll do it your way. You want to put it in for like the price that it was going for, 3 months ago at the top of the market, fine. But in 3 weeks' time, if nothing's happened, I think that we should, put it at this price. When we say that, when we do that, can you kind of unpack, from a contract standpoint, how that would look? Would we cancel the listing on MLS and then put a price reduction and then come back in with fresh days on the market? Or how would you like that to be seen, like from a technical perspective?
So ultimately, the reality of it is, if you cancel a listing and relist it tomorrow, everybody's going to know it. The days on market, it has an impact if they get to an extreme level. But when it comes to, the strategy where you're looking at, how is this going to play out and what we're looking at for price reductions, write it into your listing contract. Your Schedule A, you can basically state that, for 2 weeks, if we don't meet certain criteria, the seller agrees that we will adjust the price to X amount, reduced by 10,000, reduced by 15,000, whatever it is. Any little detail or situation like that, you can write it into the listing contract. You can have an agreement where you pre-sign a change order form. But if you are going to write that into the contract, make sure that you're clear on the criteria that has to be met. Like we've had, 15 or 20 showings within the past, 10 business days kind of thing that have resulted in no offers, that kind of thing, right? So have some sort of qualifying criteria that, triggers moving forward with that price reduction. When you do a reduction, there's very good practice, not just to obviously change the price, but swapping out photos. Changing the cover photo, rearranging the photos that you have in place, rewrite the verbiage, rewrite the description, refresh the listing. It's one thing to do an adjustment, but if nothing else changes, we as realtors will see that, and we'll see the picture and we'll be like, oh yeah, seen that one, seen that one, seen that one. But if you swap stuff out, and everybody on an auto email or an auto notifier will get, a notification of the adjustment. But, unless we do a little bit more, and I think that most sellers would expect, a little bit more effort for, because it's just a small way for us to provide a little bit more value, but reworking the verbiage and swapping out the photos and changing up the listing so it freshens up the entire listing and it's not just a price change, goes a long way. And that's something that you can have in your conversation with your seller about what you'll do when you get to that point. So we agree that, 10 days from now, if we've got 20 showings and no offers, then we're going to adjust the price. And when we do that, you're going to commit to, refreshing the entire listing, photos, rearrangement, reverbiage, that kind of stuff. And, that's part of, some of the, the negotiation or the value that you're going to provide them to, to help them understand the process and get them ultimately where they need to be, especially if your list at the top end of a range of prices when, that's really what they're hoping for. But the reality is they're probably not going to get it. Did that answer your question, Andy?
You bet.
Okay. Jack, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to share my personal experience, because I've just been going through with my client up in Duncan. We started at 689. I've just done my second price drop as of yesterday. I was a little nervous, talking to her about it, but at the end of the day, she really wanted my opinion on what was happening. So I went back up there a couple days ago. I knocked on some businesses around, let the community know that there's an awesome opportunity here. We are doing a price drop. This might be a wonderful opportunity. So I went the extra mile, told her what I've done. And she really appreciated that, because we've literally had 2 showings in 30 days. So nothing's happening. So I thought, like, I need to change something here. And I let her know that this was my plan of attack. We're going to drop the price to $599, which will catch a lot of those eyes for those people under that 600 mark. And she liked my strategy. She was becoming aware of what was happening. But at the beginning, I was certainly, a little nervous about this, but I built that confidence to say, this is what we need to do to sell this place. So at the end of the day, you got to do what's best for the clients. And she really appreciated that I was giving her my, real estate knowledge and my insight on the matter. So we'll see what happens.
100%. It's always about the client. We often sometimes will weigh in with sort of what our goal or what our end result would ultimately be. But in the end, you know, you act on behalf of your client. So you have to make sure that they're first. And when you're setting, you know, those expectations, when you take that listing, especially right now, you know, I've seen quite a few, you know, price adjustments and price drops, and I've had a lot of conversations with some younger realtors that are looking, you know, how am I going to negotiate with my seller right now? We need to get this down. And really the start of that is the very beginning of the listing. Set those expectations in advance. The same with buyers, but be clear if, you know, if you're, and I mean, get creative with it. Sometimes I know in the past, like I've had experiences where, you know, I've given the seller a range and they want to list outside or above that range, you know, tell them, look, you're happy to do it, but here's what we're going to do. One, you're going to pay me more money. Two, you're going to give me a longer listing. And three, you know, if we don't meet certain criteria, then you're going to agree to reduce the price. And provide that value when you go back for that conversation. Make sure you have yourself armed. Make sure you have tools, you know, in hand to really just sort of emphasize or try to drive home the point of what they really need to hear. Ultimately, they want to sell, but you know that sometimes it's tough for them to let go. You need to talk about, you know, the value. You know, what does it cost to hold on to the property? You know, for somebody with a $500,000 mortgage that, you know, they're paying, you know, for example, you know, $3,000 a month on, you know, you're paying a monthly mortgage, you're paying property taxes, you're paying utilities, you have all of these costs associated with owning this property. So yeah, the mortgage payment is $3,000, but it's costing you $4,500 a month. So, you know, every week that we sit on the market, that's another $4,500 that is, you know, is coming off. It's money out of your pocket. So
especially in a declining markets too, you know, just keeping your clients informed of where the market is now, but where it's going as well. You know, Ron always says you shouldn't be pricing for you know, the current market, but where the market's going to be, you know, a month or two down the road. I mean, and you know, that's really, I mean, if you're pricing it right and you're wanting it to move, his advice. So what do you think of that, Darren?
It's 100%. You know, the one thing that the only thing you really have control of is price. You know, you can't change location. You know, what, unless a seller is willing to spend a ton of money to, you know, increase the value of their property, the only thing you have is price. And if it's out of line, or if it's out of whack, or it's well above, you know, what the market is offering, we have to be clear. You know, we have to make sure that they understand that, you know, the likelihood of us getting the result that we're looking for is very low. And, you know, here's your data, you know, here's the information, here's the comparables, here's the range. This is where we need to be, somewhere in this price range. And if we're in a seller's market, yeah, we could probably list up here. But if we're not in a seller's market, we're probably going to have to be here or even lower. You know, but it's got to be captured in that range. And part of your listing presentation obviously should include, it's really tough sometimes to give a pinpointed price, but if you're going to pick something on the scale of where, of the, you know, the range where that should be, it should be very relative to the current conditions of the market. Because if you do list at the top and you're on a declining market, as the market's declining, sure, you may reduce the price, but you're gonna decrease or devalue at the same pace. And until you make that actual jump to get in line with the market, you're just going to chase it down on a parallel scale. You'll never catch it unless you jump to that price point.
While we're on the topic of price and stuff, Darren, I was hoping that you could maybe touch on, if you're the seller or even the buyer for that matter, negotiations. Say you're making an offer or a counter offer, you get a low ball offer in if you're the listing agent. How do you approach the negotiations? How low is too low? How do you counter? Like, I haven't really done much negotiating, to be quite honest. I mean, coming out of the market we were just in, that crazy market, it's nice now that we can actually put conditions in on offers and stuff. If you're the, you know, the selling agent, you know, helping your buyer out. However, but when it comes to price, I don't know what is there an etiquette? You know, I don't want to like
Yeah.
lowball to the point where you're like, you know, insulting the seller, you know, to the point where they're like, I don't care what that guy gives me. If he gives me asking or over asking, I don't even want to consider his offers anymore. Like, is there a guidelines, you know, as far as percentages above or below that you should go?
So, guidelines, nothing specific. But a really good stat to utilize and really stay on top of is really the sell price to list price ratio. That's a good point, a good place to start. But that conversation that you're asking about, it's very different from a listing realtor's perspective, and it's very different from a buyer's realtor perspective. From a buyer's realtor like Jack, I love that house that Annie has listed. I want to make an offer on it. I know it's $1 million, but I want to go in at 700,000. Like, what are you going to do? Like, I'm your client. I'm providing you with a lawful instruction to prepare an offer that's $300,000 below ask. And how do you respond to that? So it's the risk. So what's the goal? You want to lock up a property. Do you see value at $1 million? Where do you see value? And when you prepare a CMA, hopefully for your buyer, you'll have a reasonable range, and that may be reflected in the list price. It may not be. But when you prepare that CMA and you have that conversation about what to expect in the range, you're setting yourself up, with a little bit of ammunition and a little bit of it's something that you can always fall back on or return to when we have this conversation. When you're preparing low ball offers, if I was adamant, and I said to, or whoever, I love this property, I want you to make this offer, write it up at this price for me. You have two options. You can try to change my mind, or you can explain the risks of what it means to go in low. The going in really low from a buyer's perspective, and you touched on it, is a very significant risk of pissing the other side off. The selling realtor will probably give you, the listing real or the buyer realtor, a lot of grief, so on and so forth. But in the end, I mean, you've got to kind of take that. But sorry, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch, because I dealt with this exact scenario last evening with my friends. We put an offer in a house up in Cowichan, and they wanted to go considerably lower. I advised them, I'll do whatever you want because I work for you and that's my job. We'll put it out there and see where we land. I sort of built them up to get prepared for not getting acceptance, right? So what I like about this is they trusted me, and they trusted that we were going to put an offer out and see where we stuck. And at least this way it built that trust with the client. So for the new realtors out there, I advise always doing this, to put something in writing. We're at the stage in the market now where putting offers out, they're going to be tough to do. So if you get an opportunity to do it and then see. And we did get a counter back, and we were just miles apart. And I explained to them that, hey, maybe we'll just take a step back with this property, wait for a month, see if the price dips, and then go back in. Because at least this way, the current owners see that we have interest. So I explained to them, let's just put our foot on the dance floor, start dancing, see if we can get any traction. So we've done that. But we're off by about 60K. So we're just going to jump back in 3 weeks and see if the original owners will sort of do a deal with us. But at least this way, I built that sort of trust and understanding that I'll do whatever it takes for them to put out an offer that's in their price point, right? So I think I'll get a deal done with my clients. It's just going to take some time, right? You got to take the necessary.
Yeah, and assuming that property will still be available at that time, right? So, from a buyer's perspective, the risk obviously of cutting all communication with the seller all of a sudden no longer wants to talk to you anymore. So you will not get a deal on that property if the seller refuses to talk to you. When you're, $50,000 apart, it baffles sometimes, when you have these conversations. I've seen deals fall apart over $5,000. And, when you're talking about 1% of the purchase price, it's really important to make your clients sort of understand the value of their position in a contract. Like if we're $50,000 apart, Andy, on a deal, and you're the listing realtor and I'm the buyer realtor, you know, the conversation you're having with your seller is probably like 50 grand. Like that's a pretty significant chunk of change for the seller just to let go of. Jack, from your buyer's perspective, you know, 50 grand is what, $300 a month? You know, it boils down to about $75 a week. So, you know, maybe it's a small lifestyle change. You know, you go to dinner once every 2 weeks as opposed to once a week. You know, you buy a little less wine, or, you know, instead of buying, you know, a name brand something, you buy a, you know, no name potato chips kind of thing, right? Like just small adjustments. And then, you know, when you're talking about that information, you know, the conversation with your buyer is, are you okay with letting this go? Like, is this your place? Is this the one you want to see? Is this where you see yourself? And, you know, are you willing to let this go for $300 a month? The seller, you know, it's 50 grand out of their pocket. That's what we're talking about right now. But when it comes to you, we're talking about $300 a month. And is that, are you comfortable losing your dream home, if this is your dream home, to $300 a month? Does that make sense?
A lot of moving parts for sure.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, you can, and these conversations are, you know, they continually evolve. Like, you know, we haven't even really talked about, you know, how to sort of present and negotiate with other realtors. It really is just negotiating with your clients. That's a bit of a challenge, and they can go in so many different directions. You know, on the opposite side of the scale there, or the spectrum, you know, you're a listing realtor, and, you know, your seller has been pretty adamant about, you know, what they're willing to expect and what they would, you know, be prepared to move on. And you get a low ball offer. You know, your seller is going to be pissed off. They're probably not going to want to talk to you. You know, so how do you navigate that? You know, how do you take this, you know, this shitty offer, for lack of a better term, and turn it into something that might be a little bit more positive? So, you know, talking with your seller, you know, at least, you know, do everything you can to try and keep that conversation open. You know, and you know, if at the very least, you know, send a counter offer back at full price, you know, and just make it clear to that buyer that maybe we're willing to negotiate a little bit, but you're way off base, you know, but send something back to them and allow them the opportunity to respond. And I mean, you can do it verbally. However, you know, nothing in real estate is binding unless it's in writing. You know, the rule number one is it must be in writing. So I know that there's, you know, a fairly common practice just to kind of go back and forth verbally, and, you know, it does sometimes open up the opportunity for, you know, a little bit of confusion and stuff, but you should always encourage the seller to get it in writing. And if they refuse, I mean, what's your response? You know, you've got to go back, you know, to the buyer's realtor and say, look, here's where we are. You know, here's the value of the property based on the evaluation that we've done. We appreciate your, you know, the offer coming forward from your buyer. We're not there. We're willing to have a conversation, but you're going to have to do better. You know, if you want to start this conversation, you need to get to a point that's reasonable, and have that conversation with the buyer realtor. You know, we're talking, even if it is, you know, 50 grand, like, you know, have that conversation, make sure the buyer agent knows that, you know, that's $50,000 out of your client's pocket, but it's only a few $100 a month for your buyer. And maybe that will encourage the buyer's agent to have that conversation with the buyer and apply a little bit different perspective. Sometimes you get met with, you know, with a little frustration or a little angst from a buyer realtor, or even a seller's realtor, depending on the side of the transaction you're on. But in the end, you know, when somebody comes at you like that, that's really a lot of frustration that's probably resulting from the conversation that they're having with their clients. So you have to kind of, you know, remove that from the situation, really just really look to the, you know, to the meat of the matter, and try not to get, you know, stuck up in a, you know, in a pissing match, for, you know, for lack of a better term there. Anybody
Yeah,
have
and
any?
one question on putting in an offer and keeping rapport with, like, let's say the other agent on the other side. I've been told that sometimes it's good practice to reach out to the listing agent before putting in an offer to see if there's anything that that they would like included with the offer. What are your thoughts on that, as far as having that conversation verbally on the phone with the other agent before putting in an offer?
Yeah, a feeler conversation, especially when you know it's going to take a little bit of negotiation. If you reach out to the listing realtor, is there a preferred closing date? Or are there something specific, that your seller is going to be looking for in a contract, other than obviously full price? But absolutely, it's a very proactive way to help create a contract that actually will show a little bit more benefit to the seller. If you can do a little bit of research or get a little information in advance of what the seller might be looking for, and you can incorporate that, there will be some benefit that comes from that. Jack, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think that's an integral part to any transaction, is making that connection with the other side. I do that all the time. I reach out to the other agent and sort of get the feel, right? Basically just throwing it out there like, hey, has there been much interest in this property? I see it's been on the market for quite some time. My clients may have some interest. I don't let them know that we have a lot of interest, but just get a little bit of a feeler. And this will just continue to help the transaction, because you're building a bit of a relationship with the other side. If you come in all crusty, asking for this, that, and not, you're just starting off really badly. So I think that's an integral part to our business, is building that strength with the other side and keep that rapport really, really good.
Ego is your worst enemy in representing your client. When you look at your relationship and you look at what your responsibility is, and I know I've said this before, the role of the realtor is well beyond a salesperson nowadays. You go back, a couple of generations, and we were all just salespeople. Today, you're not. There is an element of sales in the work that you do, but you represent your client first and foremost. And if our egos get in the way of establishing good lines of communication between other parties, then we're ultimately negatively impacting the representation that we're providing to our clients. It's not in their best interest. We really have to have a thick skin sometimes when talking to other realtors, because there are a lot of realtors out there, and there are a lot that are fairly aggressive. There are a lot that are, fairly sure of themselves. There are a lot of realtors that will, engage in a conversation without even talking to their client. And you have to be able to sort of figure out how to navigate and work around those types of situations, because it's all about your client.
Yeah, and remember that you will deal with this agent at some point down the road, right? So make sure you always keep those lines of communication open, and don't have that breakdown of communication, because you will eventually have to deal with this person down the road, right?
That's where your brand and your reputation come into play. When you're talking about writing lowball offers, and figuring out how to present those for your buyer, it's important, while you have the responsibility to move forward with that buyer, if you continue to work with that buyer to do what they're asking you to do, consider what the impact of that will have on your brand, and who you are, because you will be working with realtors in our marketplaces for a long time to come. And depending on the relationship you have with that buyer, you may want to look at that, but you don't want to get yourself into a spot where, oh, here comes another offer from Mark, might as well just we'll just send this off, and I'll just tell my seller that this is just what Mark does. It's and it's not you though, right? Like, you're just following the instructions of your client. But the other side of that is, it impacts the relationship that you have with that realtor. So how you present it and how you communicate and negotiate with other realtors is going to have an impact on the business that you build down the road. And that's kind of the hard conversation sometimes you have to have with a buyer client. Like, we're not going to get this reputation. And if your buyer client continues to do this over and over and over again, you have to explain to your buyer that, look, this is the reputation you're getting. You know, we're going to run into realtors that know and talk, and they know you from contracts here and forth. And, you know, if we throw another offer on the table, maybe there's another, maybe there isn't. But the question is going to be really, how serious is this guy? You know, he's made, you made 5 or 6 offers on 5 or 6 different properties. They're all, you know, significantly below ask or under, you know, what a reasonable range would be. So, you know, in working through this and setting those boundaries and setting those guidelines, you know, it's, you know, consideration for your reputation and the client's reputation is going to be really important. We've all dealt with, you know, difficult buyers and difficult sellers, but we have to, you know, well, it's our job as their representatives to try and take that difficult level of difficulty out of, you know, the communication line. Like, we're the go-between, so we have to figure out how to kind of remove that. Anybody have any thoughts, any questions? Nothing. Mark, you've been out and about. What about like, have you had any challenges you know, the last couple of times that you've been out working with clients?
So I had a buyer meeting and then a couple showings last week with somebody who requested information and showings on the Monday holiday, and I met them on the Tuesday. I presented had a very good conversation with them and building rapport for like 20 minutes, and then told them that there's a couple forms through the BCFSA that I'd like to go over with them, and that I started discussing the door and how it's not a contract and what they're getting through representation and agency, and they just weren't having it. And we're like, no, we don't want to sign anything, whatever. And so that was kind of, it is what it is. Like, sometimes you just get clients that want to see properties and whatnot, and I get that. And so I showed them those properties, and then I reached back out to them, and they're just not really interested in moving forward or doing anything. I think, like, sometimes you just get people that want to use you to see properties, which is fine, especially when you're starting out, because like, I'm still in this stage where I need to be looking at properties, whether it's with clients or not. So it's like, whatever, it's all good. And then the only thing that I really have going right now is we have April and I together have a client that has put in an offer, and their subjects are to be removed tomorrow. So they're doing a septic inspection in the morning. So I've never been to a septic inspection, so I'm going to go and check that out and see how that all goes. Yeah. Hopefully it goes well, and they have to decide, because the house inspection by the home inspector came back with a few issues, like the windows are all not to code. So the house was built in 1901, so they're trying to decide it, like, if they want to come back and ask for a reduction in price and whatnot. So it's just trying to figure that all out. April's away, so we're just communicating. She's in Europe, so it's a strange situation, but it's good experience, if nothing else.
Interesting, you know, when you know, inspections are often something that you know, buyers would like to take the opportunity to negotiate. It's one of those situations, you know, and it really isn't. It shouldn't be, you know, unless it's something that is pretty severe or pretty significant. It really is a snapshot of the health of the home and a picture of the home at a current state. You know, so my practice has always been, when I was walking through a house, you know, we look at the value, you know, we can see things like, you know, old windows, we can see things like old furnaces, and we can see, you know, various deficiencies throughout the house. I always, you know, took a preemptive sort of practice with respect to the inspection when we're walking through, to point all of these little deficiencies out. Because an inspection report, you know, when a buyer gets it, can be, you know, 50, 100 pages of, you know, some of the information will be, you know, specific to the house. Some of the information will be specific to, you know, what it should be at today's current code. But, also, with that buyer, we know this house was built 100 years ago, probably not going to, meet today's current code. In a lot of cases, we can see that the windows are not up to date. The seller is obviously aware of that, and those are probably all considerations that they took into when they established what their list price would be.
Yeah, when they were going to look at the house, like we went for coffee before with them and talked about it, and they're like, "Oh, we're okay with renovations. Our brother or cousin that's what he does, so we can do it for cheap and just pay for the parts and stuff." So they obviously knew that going into the showing that might be something that could be part of the process. But
a good conversation to have with that buyer will be the sort of risk of going in and asking for something for nothing. When it comes to something like old windows, for example, did you look at the house? Yeah, we saw the windows. Yeah, we knew that before the inspection was done, right? So I mean, there's a risk of potentially causing a little bit of flux or even potentially losing the house if the seller is not willing to negotiate or whichever. So you open up that door. Go ahead.
She's already it's this for sale by owner too. So we had the conversation with them before we went to the showing about the fee agreement and whatnot, and they reworked the price so that they went in a little lower, and then she negotiated it up so that she didn't have to pay our commission, basically. Well, she does, but
it's part of the purchase price.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I think they're fully aware of everything going in. So as long as the septic inspection goes well.
Yeah. In future and stuff, when it comes to inspections, definitely, when you're showing a house and you're walking through a house with a buyer, don't ever hesitate to point out little things like, oh, that's probably going to come up in inspection, or that could be an issue. Maybe it's worth getting a second opinion on, or maybe that's something that we talk to the inspector about to look into very specifically. So Jack, did you have your hand up?
There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, just personally for you, if you want to do an open house up at the townhouse there, I've just done a considerable drop on the price, and I think it's going to be quite busy there with some buyers. I've already had a couple people reach out. I don't know what your schedule's like this week, but maybe I'll shoot you a text after.
Yeah, sure. That sounds good.
Cool. Sounds good.
Anybody else have any comments or thoughts on some recent experiences related to what we're talking about here? Anything else they want to share? Anybody listening?
We're listening, Darren. Don't worry.
Well, let's carry on. I mean, we can. We'll go back a little bit here and really just sort of, a little bit further on the topic of, just sort of your reputation and your communication style and how you handle, essentially what are ultimately conflicts. When you are going through, the process of a negotiation, be it with a seller, be it with a buyer, be it with another realtor on the other end of a transaction, they're really just sort of little problems that pop up. And I'm a big fan of being proactive. Anticipating what is going to come up will often alleviate a lot of the challenges. And a good example of that really is just the walkthrough of the house with the buyer prior to the inspection. Give them a little bit of preparation and give them some time to consider what they can expect to see from an inspection. If they're young buyers, maybe they haven't had a whole lot of experiences, maybe they don't know what to expect from what that inspection is going to look like. Have that conversation, share the details. This is what you can expect to see. Stuff like a 100-year-old house. It's not going to meet code today. It won't, but the inspection will be based on a standard that would meet current code today. So although it's not going to meet it, and yes, it's based on the current standard. However, when it was, when it was built or when it was renovated, it was brought up to the standard of the day, right? So that conversation can go a long way, even with just financing challenges, what they can expect, what they need. Really before you start looking at houses, if you have that, the buyer agency presentation, and I don't know if Andy's still on here, but Andy, I've been really impressed with the process that you have established with your buyer agency agreement, because you're setting those boundaries and those guidelines at the very onset. And I've seen a couple of buyer agency contracts come through from you, and you meet the buyer, and much like you meet the seller, you're basically having a listing conversation with a buyer, setting the expectations of what you're going to do, what you're going to provide, what they can expect from you, and what you can expect from them.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just, it seems to me.
Oh, I think we're losing you.
Like whenever you're going to be doing business, sort of a meeting, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Some sort of like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you cut out there. I think we missed a couple seconds of your input.
Yeah, I'm just out and about driving around, but basically I think that in any situation where you're dealing with someone that you're going to be working with, that, it's imperative that you kind of draw the boundaries of where the employment contract stands, and we guide that, right? We to a certain extent, that's what we do, is we guide them along the path to getting a place, right? So it just kind of shows that you're serious, and then it gives them the chance to see if they're serious about it or not, right? Because the last thing you want to do is work with someone who just doesn't really care, right?
Mm-hmm. And from a negotiation perspective, with a buyer, you're negotiating with them at the onset. When you're going through that process, you're trying to show them the value for what the expected remuneration is that you're going to get, and you're providing them information, you're providing them details, you're providing them with what you're going to do for them in return for what they can expect you to receive as compensation. So it's it has just as much value as a listing presentation or a listing contract, and ultimately arguably there's no other way to do it, although it typically isn't standard practice. But when you're talking about it and when you're going through it, do you have the conversation about getting paid? Do you have the conversation about how you can expect to get paid?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to that part of the buyer's exclusive agency contract, I touch upon remuneration and how 99 times out of 100 it's the seller that pays. But on those 1% situations where you're dealing with somebody who's a for sale by owner, or they just, for whatever reason, want to pinch pennies and not pay for a professional's services, then I let them know that in those situations, I would expect to get paid for my services, and that would come from you, my client.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I let them know that it's not very often that happens, but if for whatever reason they find themselves in a situation like that and they absolutely love the person's house, then I would do everything in my power to try to negotiate below market value. So in essence, it's the seller that's still kind of paying for it in a way.
Yeah.
And they understand, like that nobody should have to work for free or for below value, especially if they're providing a really good service, right? So
yeah.
You just level with them, and most reasonable people will understand that, and then you go from there, right?
Yeah. And
I can't,
go ahead, Mark.
I can't remember where I heard this, but along those lines, someone had mentioned that the client has three options. First is to negotiate the price so that you get paid. Second is for them to pay you, or third is to not look at that property, not like look at something else. Stop looking at that property. So
Yeah.
they have
So
options, but
you do have options for that, and to be careful though, when you're working at a buyer agency contract, make sure your Schedule A or your addendum allows for the exclusion of properties that aren't going to compensate you, which is really key, because if you have a situation where a buyer wants to proceed and there's no way for you to get paid, the buyers, well, ultimately the buyer agency contract would protect you there. But lack of a contract, for example, you could find yourself working for free. I've seen it happen, and it's a learning experience for a lot of realtors, because they do realize the amount of work that goes into seeing a transaction through from start to finish. Ultimately, when you're having that conversation with the buyer, the primary method of you getting paid for the work you do is through the proceeds of the transaction. And when you have a for sale by owner, for example, a really good preemptive conversation is when you're phoning to make the appointment, explain what agency is, explain who you're representing, and explain the process. If my buyer is interested in your property, my buyer also would like me to get paid, and the method would be through the proceeds of transaction. So if we bring an offer forward, we will include paperwork that allows me to get paid through the proceeds of transaction without my buyer having to cut a check. My buyer wants to finance my commission, so we will make sure that it's included in the purchase price. And if that's the case, that's more or less on paper, the seller will pay, but in the end, you broker the transaction in such a way by whatever the price is, your fees are included. Make sure the seller understands that your fees are included in the purchase price. And when you talk with the seller, talk net numbers. If it's $500,000, the deal's written at $510,000. The seller's going to get their money, and you're going to get your fee, and your buyer's not going to have to write a check. Janice?
So, do you guys find that, Darren, you've been in real estate for quite a while, and do you find that most of the time, like for people that do not, like the sellers that do not pay the buyer agent, is like for sale by owner, or have you had other instances that someone's not willing to pay? And also, wouldn't that be on the MLS contract, or sorry, the listing itself, saying like how much they're willing to pay before you even go view it or anything like that?
So the rules of cooperation in the multiple listing contract provide that a cooperating commission must be provided for, and it cannot be less than $1. Which is why a lot of times you'll see $1 for cooperating commissions. Now that can come from a mere posting company, for sale by owner company, or it can even come from a discount brokerage. Just because that's what's there doesn't mean you can't negotiate a reasonably expected fee into your contract. If for example, a 1% realty type organization is offering $5,000, but your typical commission or expected commission would be $10,000, you can accept that $5,000, but you can also include a term or an additional fee agreement that compensates you with what you would reasonably expect. And your buyer signs it, it gets presented along with the offer to the seller. You present that first to the seller, your fee agreement of what your expected remuneration is to be paid out of the contract, and before the offer is presented, and you incorporate it into your offer. The fee agreement dated such and such will be, will form part of this contract, kind of thing. But you present that to the seller first. It's an agreement that with the offer you're about to see, this is what my office is going to receive as far as remuneration. And then you go directly into although the purchase price is, you want 500 grand, you're getting 500 grand, but the purchase price is 510, my buyer is going to finance the commission.
So if you're writing the MLS contract, then it's like you do that before you finish writing the contract, or do you write it and then give it to them, and then whether they decline or not, counter
You
in
mean
the sense of commission wise?
set the if it's a sale by owner or even a discount broker that doesn't offer a typical commission, having that conversation in advance, call them up and say, look, this is the intention of my buyer, this is the intention of the brokerage, this is what we would typically expect, and be prepared because you will see this in a contract. When we start going back and forth and negotiating, we'll negotiate, sort of that net number. What does your seller, or what do you, Mr. Seller, want to see in your pocket? And that's what we're work towards. That might be a very different number than on the face of the contract, but that's the number we're going to discuss, because my buyer wants me to get paid. I want to get paid. And obviously, we need to get you, what you're comfortable with or what you're happy to accept.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, but the fee agreement, when you are presenting that to the seller,
Yeah.
Prior to even looking at the contract, you're having that conversation with your disclosure of representation and dealing with an unrepresented party. You're providing with the risks, the risk form, the disclosure of risks to unrepresented parties, and you're providing them with the fee agreement. And after that's all done and gone through, all they're going to want to see is the contract. So they're probably going to fly right through that, as long as they understand that, we're working in a system that's going to allow them to get what they want. Then generally speaking, you shouldn't have too many problems. Once in a while, you'll run across, somebody who's quite stubborn and quite, entrenched. But generally speaking, if you take this information and you present it in such a way, and this really goes a long way, with establishing your practice and working through your system and working through your routine and being confident. Understand that how you present it and the confidence that you project will be very beneficial as far as any negotiation process goes. It'll benefit your buyer, and it'll actually probably improve the relationship with the seller as far as being, open and communicating back and forth.
Okay, will we be able to go over this again, like as in just kind of scenario situation when we're doing the other meeting with the contract?
Yeah,
that you just worked on?
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great.
Hang on a second. Okay. I'll just put that on my list of topics.
Okay, thanks.
So we're getting close to 10. I'm going to be heading up to Lake Cowichan here very shortly. Before we end anything, does anybody have anything else they want to share as we wind up? Any thoughts on today? Jack?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know, like, at the end of the day, you got to show confidence, and you got to show that you're a real estate agent, that you know what you're talking about. If you don't, sell it like you know what you're talking about, because this way it gives you integrity, it gives you the ability to show that you're doing your job right. If you go in a little bit willy-nilly, no confidence, people aren't going to trust you. So I've learned this as I get going in this business, is to own it and, fake it till you make it.
Confidence is really important, but there's a line too there. It's sometimes okay to not know, and just you can confidently express the fact that you may not know something, but you have resources and you have supports. You all have supports, in the office. The realtors that have been around for a number of years and have a lot of experience under their belt, generally are always willing to help. You've always got me to call on, the partner group and stuff like that. So you have resources available to you. So, part of your value and part of your presentation with your client is you have this network behind you and you have this network supporting you. So utilize that as well. And that will help sort of bond that relationship and establish that confidence with your client.
What are you doing up in Cowichan?
What's that?
What are you doing in Cowichan?
I'm actually going to go through a little bit of the transaction desk process and loading up information into back office with Maggie in the Cowichan office, and then meet with a few realtors. There's a couple out there that wanted to go over a couple of things, and I missed Tuesday because I was in Kelowna for the Remax Kickstarter thing. So it's just a little extra trip today.
Cool.
Hey, Darren, I have a topic that I'd like you to maybe touch on in a future session for new licensees. If you could do branding, you know, and advertising, and for us new licensees who want to brand ourselves out alongside of our groups and stuff like that, and get our name out there, how to do it in compliance. You know, give us some examples with, you know, if we want to make our own business cards or our own, you know, whatever, cups, websites, everything, you know, just examples of, you know, to be in compliance.
Yeah.
What would you need to add, you know,
Yeah.
because I mean, of course there's BCFSA, knowledge base and stuff like that, but it would be actually nice to have like a session on it with examples and stuff where you could share your screen possibly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll put that on the list. Something, you know, I don't know how well integrated you guys are with Max Center. There is a ton of branding and marketing material in there for you guys to utilize. So I'll definitely put that on the list to go through, and we can touch base on it. But if you've got a little bit of time, you know, get in there and really utilize it. You have basically your own website, which is free to use. Obviously various marketing or client management resource materials, but branding, marketing, all of the compliance, you know, for as far as Remax goes is in there too. But yeah, for sure, definitely we'll bring that up.
I learned a lot about that in Kickstart, which was awesome, and just how much resources there are available to us, you know, just being Remax agents. A lot of that is geared, I think, towards more independent agents who may or may not be on a team or in a group of individuals that work together. So that's another thing that would be cool, you know, maybe take the resources that are available in Max Center and show how we could apply those to situations like if you're in Victoria Homes per se, or for the Neil Estate Group, how would you use the resources available to make sure that you're in compliance with the sub brokerage level, you know, in your advertising?
That would be so helpful.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
Okay,
guys rock.
thanks everybody. It's if nothing further, we'll let you go, and I appreciate you guys taking the time this morning to hang out with us.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, guys.